Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers. Because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD and working on a product to help people overcome these problems because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you. Most people have heard of phytoestrogens, but did you know there are beneficial phytoandrogens that mimic and support testosterone and more? The top source of these is pine pollen. If you're looking for 100% natural hormonal support for men and women, you've got to try this. Right now, Lost Empire Herbs' best-selling pine pollen is available for 1 penny plus shipping and handling. Go to geniuspollen.com to find out more and grab yourself a bag today. No hidden charges, no trial offer, no shenanigans. Just a low-cost way to try Lost Empire Herbs' top product for next to nothing.
Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast, now part of the Finding Genius Foundation. I have Dr. Cassie Holmes. She's the author of Happier Hour: How to Beat Distraction, Expand Your Time, and Focus on What Matters Most. She's a professor at UCLA's Anderson School of Management. She's an expert on time and happiness. And we're going to talk about her research and why she wrote the book and what's in the book. So, Cassie, thanks for coming.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Richard. It's a treat to be here and to chat with you.
Oh, thank you. Well, tell me about a little bit about your background. Were you like a particularly distracted person, and that's what got you into this area of research, or what's your background like?
Yeah. I feel like we are all distracted people. I mean, 'tis the age in which we have lots of distractions, including that never-ending to-do list that's in our head. What motivated me in my work, so I focus on happiness and understanding the role of time. And my PhD is I'm trained as a social psychologist. But what drove me to study happiness, and in particular the role of time, was recognizing just how limiting I experienced time to be in terms of achieving all that I wanted to, as well as enjoying life in the way that I wanted to. And there's sort of a particular moment earlier in my career where I came face to face with my experience of time poverty, which is the term that we use to describe this acute feeling of having too much to do and too little time to do it all. And it was earlier in my career when I was the faculty at Wharton in Philadelphia, and I had a 4-month-old baby. And I had agreed to give a talk up in New York. So it was one of these, I woke up super early, missed those morning cuddles with my little one. And between back-to-back meetings, giving the talk, and then, the dinner that comes after the talk, I was rushing to make the very last train that would get me home to my 4-month-old and my husband. And I was sitting on the train that night, and I remember it so vividly because I was just so exhausted. And as I was looking at the sort of the houses and the, whiz by in the dark, I was like, oh my gosh, life is passing so fast. There is, between trying to keep up with the pressures of my job, between trying to be a good parent, good partner, good friend, trying to keep it so my house isn't super gross, there are, household tasks to stay on top of. I was realizing that it just felt like too much. And I considered leaving my career with this recognition that it was sort of too much to do. Could I continue to keep up with it? I didn't feel like I was doing any of it very well, nor enjoying any of it along the way. And so
I get
this sort of, yeah,
I get a quick story. It just brought it to mind, if you don't mind. In
yeah.
college, I did engineering. I used to take like 16 to 18 credit hours a semester, and there were a couple guys that were going crazy, like doing like 22, 24 credit hours. So one semester, I was like, all right, and I upped it to like 21 credit hours. But it was the worst semester I've ever had in terms of grades, time, happiness, everything. It was just too much, and when I got overwhelmed that much for the whole semester, it was terrible. So I kind of got a taste of what you're talking about, I think.
Absolutely. So time poverty, like I mentioned, this feeling of having too much to do and not enough time to do it with you and all of those credit hours. So many people in the tasks that they take on or the tasks that are just sort of presented to them. And it's very pervasive. So we conducted a national poll and we found that almost half of Americans report being time poor. And it's not just as Americans, folks around the globe report having sort of constantly being rushed and being hurried. And this is bad because our research shows that when we feel time poor, it makes us less healthy. So we're less likely to exercise, less likely to, we're likely to delay going to the doctor. We eat more fast food, which is unhealthy. It makes us less nice. So when we feel time poor, we're less likely to take the time to help others out. It decreases our confidence in being able to achieve all that we set out to achieve. And
So
ultimately,
when you say it makes people less nice, what does that
yeah.
say about New Yorkers?
Yeah.
It's true.
Is absolutely true. And there was actually an earlier sociological study where it studied the sort of speed of various cities through walking pace, and then they had these sort of interesting measures to see basically like how nice are people. And so they had this measure where they, left a letter that needed to be mailed and it was stamped, and they were interested in seeing how many people took the time to pick up the letter and then put it in a mailbox, and finding that in those cities, in New York as the sort of primary example, that are faster paced, more hurried, people are less helpful, less likely to help others out and spend the time. Not only does it make us less nice, but it also makes us less happy. And so in our work, we found that those who feel time poor experience more negative emotions, so more greater stress and worry, less positive emotions, so less enjoyment in their days, and they feel less satisfied in their lives overall. So these feelings, you in that semester and me in this, night on the train, it is an unhappy state and something to combat. And that's actually what has driven my research since. So I didn't decide to quit my job. Instead, I decided to figure out empirically, how can we tackle this experience of time poverty?
It'd be weird if you did an experiment where you had someone dress up shabbily and pretend to be like a bum. But instead of begging for money, they had a sign that said like, I have time poverty, please help. I wonder what people would do or say, or it'd be interesting if you did that with a few different signs related to time, and people might walk by and like they would either shake their head, what, or they would donate, or I don't know what they would do.
Well, the interesting thing is like, how can you give others time? And there are ways to, in terms of being helpful, perhaps by, taking on some of their tasks. But interestingly, unlike money where you're walking by and it's like you could give them, some dollars from your wallet, giving time, it's harder to give others time, but it's certainly worthwhile. So we have actually a study with Zoe Chance and Mike Norton where we found that even though when we feel time poor, we're less likely to give time, we found that actually if you do give time, it makes you feel like you have more time, which is interesting. And you're sort of like, how is that possible? And it is driven by feelings of self-efficacy. So just as an example, in one of our experiments, we conducted among adults on a Saturday, and we randomly assigned them. We gave them either the instruction, sometime today, spend 30 minutes doing something for someone else that you weren't already planning to do. So that was a giving time condition. We told others, sometime today, spend 30 minutes doing something for yourself that you weren't already planning to do. And then at the end of the day, that night, we reconnected with these participants and we asked them to report how much time they felt like they had. And interestingly, those who spent the time on someone else actually felt like they had more time. And the reason is that by spending time to help another, you actually feel really effective. It makes you realize that I accomplished a lot in just that 30 minutes. And recognizing just how much you can accomplish in that 30 minutes, you're like, oh my gosh, I can do more with the time that I have. And recognize, sort of touching back to the definition of time poverty, it's this feeling of having not enough time to do what you want to do. But when you lessen that sense of constraint, then it makes you feel more time affluent. And so not only would it be lovely, to give time for the recipient of the time, it also benefits you as well.
Most supplements are taken on faith and can take weeks or months to have an effect. Even supplements backed by scientific studies may or may not deliver those same benefits to you. But what if you could feel the results of what you took within just a few days? Lost Empire Herbs offers the highest quality, wild harvested, non-irradiated pine pollen, and that can dramatically impact your hormones fast. Right now, you can grab it for 1 cent plus shipping and handling at geniuspollen.com.
How much is there a sweet spot of time where it doesn't really affect someone negatively or it brings this positive benefit? Like, is 15 minutes too little? Has anyone studied the dynamics of it or the type of activity that seems to work versus not work?
Absolutely. I studied it. So in that night on the train, I was like, okay, should I quit my job? And then I wondered, would I be happier if I had a whole lot more time? And this is a question we put to the test. So with Hal Hirschfield and Marissa Sharif, we looked to explore what's the relationship between the amount of discretionary time people have in their days and their overall happiness and satisfaction. And to sort of operationalize that, what we did is we analyzed data from the American Time Use Survey, which captures for tens of thousands of working and non-working Americans how they spent the hours of a random day. And what we did is we calculated for each individual how many hours they spent on discretionary activities, which are, relaxing, active leisure. So, playing sports or, going to a concert or going to watch sports, as well as socializing. So spending time with family and friends. And what we found was really interesting. The relationship was an inverted U shape. That is, what we found was there was such thing as having, so on one side of that arc, that sort of rainbow shape, when on the left side, yes, having too little time was bad. Like people were less happy. And so those of us who are time poor, you in that semester, absolutely can relate to that. But what's interesting is that on the other side of, that other end of the arc, is that we found that having too much time is also bad, which is interesting because I wasn't expecting that. It told me not to quit my job because actually having too many hours in my day to do whatever I wanted isn't necessarily good. And the reason for that seems to be that we are averse to this sense of being idle, that we don't want to spend our whole days with nothing to show for how we spent those hours. We want to be somewhat productive. And so when we have too much time, it undermines our sense of purpose and therefore our feelings of satisfaction. What's interesting, so yes, there's this arc, and then there was this middle portion actually where between, in this data set anyway, less than about 2 hours of discretionary time in the day is too little. More than about 5 hours of discretionary time in the day is too much. But between 2 and 5 hours, it was actually quite flat. So it's not that having more time would be better. And so this is sort of interesting because it suggests that in this pretty wide range, it's not so much about how much time you have, it's really about how you invest the time you have. So
before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers, because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button, and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD, and working on a product to help people overcome these problems because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up. And check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
I would say
too, in that study, the chunk size of the time. So it's, it'd be easier for someone to have, let's say, 3 hours a day free because they fritter away a minute here, a minute there, 5 minutes here, but if they had it in like one chunk, I think it would feel a lot better to that person, even if they had less. Like if I had 3 hours in bits and drabs and someone else had 1 hour solid uninterrupted, I would think that they would feel better than I would. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a fantastic hypothesis. And we didn't look at that in the data in terms of how those hours are broken up across the day.
How come you ran out of time?
Right.
Good excuse.
Is always the sort of story of our life. But in other work, actually, where we were looking at how variety among one's activities relates to their satisfaction and happiness, it might actually speak to your hunch. What we found there is that it's good to have variety across your days and across your weeks because it keeps you interested and engaged. But what we actually found was when there were too much variety within the hours of your day, you actually saw this like less happiness and satisfaction because people felt like they weren't able to sort of I think it's actually in line with what you were suggesting as this sort of breaking up of activities that you're doing, which isn't satisfying. You feel like you're not actually accomplishing anything because everything's all broken up. And so that would suggest
this plays into like, I'm sorry, we'll get to it shortly, but I'm acting the same way. I feel like I've become fragmented. My attention span's shorter. I apologize. I try not to interrupt as much. Go ahead. I wanted to ask you about smartphone usage and internet when you're ready.
Well, let's talk about it now, because that's absolutely this fragmentation and distraction, which was even your initial question, is an important one because we're also subject to it. So, yeah, do you want me to talk about smartphone usage or do you want to ask?
Yeah, if you would, please. Yeah, that fragmentation, constant switching of attention, etc. Because I would think that would dramatically influence people's perception of time and their happiness level and their available time.
Yeah. And so the role of smartphone usage, I think, really comes into play with respect to distraction, even the presence of our smartphones. So there was an interesting study. Well, and you can understand why, because these smartphones, they are so darn smart. This little tiny thing that can, live in our pocket and is always at arm's reach allows us to do so much. It allows us to entertain ourselves through, watching anything that's streaming. It allows us to watch other people's lives through, social media. It allows us to get our chores done by, ordering things that we need on Amazon. Or it is this source of all these things that we can and should be doing all of the time, right? And so just having it there, that is a source of distraction because it's pulling you away from what you are currently doing, thinking about all that you could and should be doing. And actually, sort of before I talk about the effects of that, we have data, initial data that's looking at the effect of time poverty, because as I mentioned, what is time poverty? It's this feeling of having too much to do and not enough time to do it. And by having your smartphone always there, these expectations of ourselves of all that we could and should be doing, of course, there's not enough hours in the day to do it all. But even more directly, there was a neat study conducted by Liz Dunn and her colleagues showing the distracting effect of the presence of smartphones. And what she did was she had groups of participants who were dining with a group of friends, and they had them either keep their cell phones on the table, and they had some cover story as to why, versus put their phones away out of sight, not on the table. And then they measured their enjoyment of the meal afterwards. And what they found was that simply having the phone out made people enjoy their time with this, having a lovely meal with your friends less. And the reason is because they reported being more distracted and less engaged. So it even has this cognitive effect. But then also, as we're thinking about the amount of time we have, there are a limited number of hours in our days. And when you track, I actually have, I teach a course called Applying the Science of Happiness to Life Design, which is sharing the research on the science of happiness to my MBA students so that they can apply it to their lives, so they can enjoy their days more and sort of design their careers and their life so that it's more fulfilling and in line with their values and purpose.
Quick tip here. I've noticed when eating, a lot of people put their phones on the table, so do I, but having it face down versus face up is a dramatic difference. Face up, it's like almost impossible to not look at it whenever it lights up, but face down, it's easier. It's kind of more inert. It would be better to not even have it on the table, but if you got to do something, that's maybe a start.
I mean, it's not a big step to take it off the table. If you're, put it in a bag under the table or in the other room. It's like, when you get home after the workday, or if you, like leave your home office at the end of the workday, is you can put your phone away. It's very, we don't often do it, but it's very possible. In the course, I actually have my students do a digital detox where I assign them to spend 6 hours at some point, consecutive hours, a chunk of 6 hours sometime during their week, not on technology, so off their phone. And it's interesting to see the very profound impact on their emotions, on their engagement, and I will also say that my students do not like this assignment initially, and they're super mad at me because they're like, I have so much to do, and I'm like undermining their ability to be productive, and someone will need to reach them, and they were very anxious about it, and they continue to be anxious actually in the first hour often, and that sort of habit of continually reaching for the phone and wondering, who's trying to reach me, and that sort of sense of FOMO.
What are you doing in your? Are you teaching again in the classroom? And if so, what's your smartphone policy and what have you tried there?
Yeah, and I will get to that. But I think before I do, I want to make the point that after that initial hour of them being anxious, they very much settle into what they're doing and actually end up being more productive because it's not that fragmented, like, what should I be doing in this sort of distraction? And they really engage in tasks as well as whom they're with, and through that greater presence, not being distracted, they feel so much more satisfied coming out of that time. In my class, I have a very strict no technology policy, which again, my students initially are like, what are you trying to do to us? But it is absolutely for their learning and for their happiness, because research shows that when we are more attentive to the present moment, when we are engaged in our current activity, we enjoy that time more. We get more out of it. And so despite their initial grumpiness coming out of even the first class, and certainly coming out of the course, they realize the incredible value of having some time. It's not like you're going to become a total Luddite and not have a cell phone. It's just making sure that you carve out some time, putting your phone away out of sight so that you can fully engage in what you're doing. I suspect you're familiar with this concept of flow or being in a flow state. And that's when you're fully engaged and you are able to be really creative and produce a lot. And it's so satisfying because you're sort of executing at your sort of optimal capabilities. Like having your closing out of email, putting your phone away are very easy ways to increase the likelihood and create your space to increase your likelihood of getting into a flow state.
What about the speed of experience? So if I'm having dinner with, let's say my wife, and cell phones are away, we're at a restaurant, versus I don't know, I'm playing like beach volleyball, or I'm doing something that's really fast, or I'm watching a video 1.5 speed. Any relation of the speed of experience to the feeling of time and time poverty and attention?
Interesting question. I haven't looked at the sort of time perception, the effect of time perceptions, not in terms of how much you have, but in how fast it is on emotion. There is work that supports the saying time flies when you're having fun, where they found that when you're enjoying your activity more, then time does feel shorter. A watch pot never boils. That is sort of picking up on the other side of that effect, where when you are waiting for something or the experience itself is unpleasant, it feels like forever, right? But I haven't actually looked at how the other direction of that effect in terms of speed on happiness.
Well, here's why I say it. I don't like to watch, this podcast, we're doing it audio only. I've tried video. I don't like it because I feel like it's taking up extra brain space to look at the person. And I feel like I work better listening because then I could just ask good questions and think like that. So for me, the added, again, burden, I feel like it is, of a video, I can't perform as well. And then another thing I noticed is when I listen to things like audiobooks, if I listen at too fast a speed, it's too much and I can't enjoy it. And if I listen at too slow a speed, I'm like, come on.
Yeah.
So again, there seems to be like a sweet spot of a little bit faster keeps my attention, but too fast is too much and too slow is too slow. I don't know, again, with around activities, I would guess there's an ideal speed for various activities that would help get you, in flow and help get you feeling your best.
Yeah. It's interesting because, to your initial point, we do have sort of a finite amount of cognitive capacity to sort of be processing things at once. And actually, you're astute in that it requires a lot of brain power to watch other people's faces because we are sort of deciphering so much in those nonverbal cues. And so it's astute for you to recognize that for yourself, you can sort of attend more to what's being said without being sort of distracted by, trying to sort of extrapolate what I'm thinking and going to say based off of my facial expressions. And then in terms of the speed of experiences, if it is too fast, then it is, again, it's like sort of you're sort of required to process at a faster speed, which is depleting and therefore probably less enjoyable. But absolutely, since you are very smart and capable, you don't need people to talk at a snail's pace in order to get the full experience.
Yeah, if people are really slow, I want to poke my eye out. I'm like, hurry up, please. If they're too fast, it agitates me. I don't like it either.
Yeah, it's funny though, because I don't know if you have also, after I tend to listen to audiobooks at 1.6 speed. For me, that is what feels comfortable. And then when I hear the person at regular speed, it sounds super slow. So there is this sort of adaptation and sort of relative nature to our experience of how fast something is.
Yeah, another thing I've noticed, I know we're getting a little off track, but since you're auditory, you probably will like this. So certain people speak very fast, certain people don't. So I've noticed on YouTube, some people listen to 2x speed and it's no big deal. And some people, I have to stay at 1x because they're so quick. And then there's all in between. Same with audiobooks. So just another thing I noticed as well.
Yeah.
Have you maybe it'll be a cool experiment for you to tell your class, like, at some point today, I'm going to teach one thing really slow, and then another point I'm going to teach something really fast, and tell me how you feel and how you react, or maybe you observe. That'd be an interesting thing to do with your students.
Yeah, I mean, I can easily do that. I already have the stimuli set up. So, in one of the versions of my course, it's sort of a hybrid where I have videos of me lecturing that they can watch, and then we have an in-person sort of portion. So in those videos, I can randomly assign them, and make experimental conditions to listen to me at 2 times speed versus 1 versus, so, and then I can measure how much they learned and their enjoyment afterwards. That would be a fun experiment. Thanks for the idea.
Yeah, my wife believes she has some level of dyslexia, and she learned speed reading, and she said it actually helps her get through a passage and have less switching of letters. So again, I'm guessing they're pushing herself a bit, but not too much. With some speed reading, really helps her focus. But again, if it's too much, then you're like, you blow up and can't process something. So I would guess with anything time related, there's probably going to be a lot of sweet spots for attention, retention, enjoyment, etc.
Yeah. And what you're picking up on is there's lots of dimensions of time to explore. There's speed, there's the amount of, hours that you have in your day, that sense of time poverty. And in my work, I've also looked at, ways of spending time. So what are the particular activities that one can invest in or spend time on that contribute to greater levels of happiness and fulfillment versus less? And for that exercise that I have in my class to help people identify for themselves, what are those activities that are sort of worthwhile versus a waste, I have them track their time over the course of 2 weeks. And sort of for every half hour, they write down not only the activity that they're doing, but how they feel on a scale of 1 to 10. So overall positivity versus negativity on that scale of 1 to 10. And from this data, they can identify for themselves what are those activities that are associated with the sort of contribute to the most positive emotion or the happiest, and what are those activities in their days that are associated with the least amount of happiness. And also it allows them to identify just how much time they're spending on their various activities with this very personalized amount of data. And I walk through this in my book, Happier Hour, where this exercise, actually, I'm going to walk through all of this research and how we should be investing our time for greater happiness and fulfillment. But I walk through this exercise and how one can analyze their own data to identify, not only what the specific activities, but features of those activities that contribute most to happiness. And what you see often, and this shows up in the research as well, the academic research, is that the happiest times of our day tend to be those that we are sharing and fully paying attention to, again, the role of distraction or lacking distraction, sort of spending quality time with friends and family. So it's, the extent to which you're spending time in a way that makes you feel authentically and truly socially connected leads to a great amount of happiness. Exercise has a really positive effect. Being outside is interesting. It is a big mood booster. And interestingly, there was a neat study that came out of England where they used geolocation data and could identify, at every moment, where is someone? And then they would ping them and ask them how happy they were. And what they found was that simply being outside had a significant effect, positive effect on their mood. And yes, it was better if it was sunny outside. And yes, it was better if they were in a sort of natural environment versus more of an urban environment. But it was the effect of being outside versus inside had its own role in happiness. Also being well rested. So even though the activity itself, you're not tracking how you feel while you're asleep, the benefits of being well rested and getting sufficient sleep, which the research suggests is between 7 and 8 hours of consecutive sleep, has dramatic effect on not only cognitive functioning, but your happiness over the course of the subsequent day and across all of the activities that you're engaging in.
It'd be really interesting is to study the time of the procrastination. So, some people, they always wait to the last second and they do amazing work under pressure. Some people hate that. They want to, do things way earlier. But it would be interesting to see someone that considers themselves very distracted or time poor, do they procrastinate more or less versus someone that's more relaxed and living at a slower pace?
Yeah, interesting. I'm not familiar with work, nor have I done work to look at sort of procrastination as an outcome variable. I know.
Yeah, because it's a very time-based activity. You're deliberately, or your willpower is not you, but someone's willpower. Oh, sorry, cut that out. Someone's willpower is not sufficient, where they keep putting themselves either deliberately or accidentally in a time poor situation, and then they got to hurry and because they procrastinated.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the sense of being late, that does, again, sort of touching back to some of the research I was talking about before in terms of being nice to others and being willing to help others, as well as I have found effects on confidence. So in terms of regulatory focus, so we can either be, when we're approaching goals, we can be promotion focused, so like driven to achieve a positive outcome, versus prevention focused, which is trying to avoid a negative outcome. Being promotion focused is a more pleasant experience, and actually you get better results than being prevention focused. But what we found in our work is that when people have plenty of time left, so they haven't procrastinated, for instance, then you find that they're more promotion focused. As people are getting closer to the deadline, if they haven't completed the task, they become more prevention focused. And that's where that sort of stress comes in. And it's just about like getting by and not failing, as opposed to these more aspirational sort of experience of like wanting the best and working towards the best. So yeah, you do see it. And I sort of frame that in terms of confidence and being able to achieve what you set out to do. It's when you have given yourself plenty of time and you have not procrastinated, then you see sort of this more positive engagement with our tasks and our goal pursuit.
So what are, what are some things that fascinate you about your own research? What big questions do you want to answer and why?
I mean, the big question that I have been tackling, and there are so many open answers still, is this puzzle of time and happiness. That is, how, given that we have limited time in our days, that our lives are finite, how can we make the absolute most of the time we have, and not just in terms of efficiency, but really in terms of what is worthwhile and feels fulfilling. And I conduct research, which sounds sort of silly, but it's like the research questions that I tackle are those questions that I am personally grappling with. So, touching back to that example of me, wanting to quit my career on the train and move to like a sunny island where I'd have a whole lot more time, my research answered that, in fact, I should not move to the sunny island where I would have a whole lot more time, because I would feel a lacking sense of purpose and productivity. But then that doesn't necessarily, given that I'm not going to quit, how do I solve the problem of feeling like I'm not just getting by, right? How do I invest my time, not only in terms of the activities I dedicate my time to, but in how I sort of my mindset during the time that I spent to make the most of it, so that days feel fulfilling and not just overly full. And I have some work that actually shows that you can extract so much happiness, or there's so much potential happiness, even in little, simple, everyday moments that tend to get sort of, they tend to not get our attention, and therefore, we miss out on the potential happiness from them. So when in work, I was looking at the happiness that comes from extraordinary experiences that absolutely get our attention, like happy extraordinary experiences, like incredible vacations or life milestones, like getting married, graduation, having a baby, or like these wonderful experiences that we spend money on, like going to concerts, right? Is it those experiences or the simple everyday moments when I talked about the role of social connection? Those simple moments. You said that you are married, so with your wife. For many, it's, friends, their kids, their pets, noticing, your surroundings, nature, like noticing that it's a beautiful sunset or sunrise.
Mm.
And what we found was that among younger people, extraordinary experiences produce greater happiness. But interestingly, among older people, ordinary experiences produced as much happiness as extraordinary experiences. That is, as people got older. And you can understand why. So younger people tend to view their time in life as expansive, right? As you get older, you start recognizing that your time overall in life is in fact finite and more limited. By recognizing that your time is limited in that sense, not like hours in the day, like the time poverty, but recognizing that the years that we have to live, we can't take them for granted. And what that makes us realize is just how precious our time is. And that draws our attention to even those simple, ordinary moments such that we enjoy great happiness from them. And it's not just age, though, because when we led young people to recognize that their futures are in fact finite and limited, then they actually attended more to those simple, ordinary moments. And so I think that, and I've, sort of been practicing this, is that you can actually, while we have lots of demands, there's the work and lots of hours that are sort of spent in a variety of different pursuits and, dimensions and domains of our life, that there's a lot of potential happiness that comes from paying attention during minutes and the hours that we spend. So again, it's not, except at the very extremes of having too little or too much, it's not so much about how much time you have or hours in a day. It's really how you spend those hours. And I'm so excited at sort of pulling all of this research together, pulling the lessons from my course together in my book, Happier Hour, because it is absolutely sort of walking through the research so that they can apply it to their own lives and sort of invest in ways that are happier.
Yeah, a couple more thoughts. I've done a whole bunch of escape rooms, and it feels very different in the beginning than near the end, but you only got a few minutes left. And it's it's funny. Well, not funny, but you see people's personalities come out under pressure. Some people freak out and they're like, "That's it, forget it, we're dead." And other people get like super focused, and other people just get like really upset, like, "Oh my god, we're out of time." So it's just interesting to see that phenomenon. Again, it's a very time-based thing.
Yeah. Which are you?
Oh, I focus in like, I used to do these years ago with my son, and he would be like, "That's it, we're doomed," and I would focus, and we got out of a lot of rooms literally sometimes with 1 second to spare. And I told him, I said, "Look, Pops, you can never give up. See, we got out. If we gave up, we wouldn't have. So you never know. You got to keep going, So,
yeah, that's good lesson overall, to keep going and not give up. Figure out, don't quit your job when you're overwhelmed on the train. Figure out how to stick with it and make the most of it.
Well, one funny story, quick one, is when my kids were probably like, 8 to 12, we did one escape room, and this one lady, she got really stressed and she kept trying to shush them, and they called her the shusher. They didn't like her, I guess she thought that they were just like in the way, even though they were helping, So after that, we reminisced about the shusher, and my kids didn't like her, but she reacted with stress to the environment. It's like, we're not going to die. What's the big deal? But she was just freaking out. So it was just interesting what that time constraint did to people's minds.
Yeah, it is interesting.
Well, I found I was able to solve stuff a lot quicker at the end because it's like do or die situation. That's how I treated it. So it focused my mind. But I guess what I'm saying is this is a very interesting topic to me. I didn't realize there's so many things that are related to time, like in my life and everyone's life. So I just thought it'd be interesting to bring it up.
Yeah. I mean, it's the fabric of our lifetime. And that's, when you ask like what more, it is so rich of a construct, of an experience, of a resource, that there are so many dimensions of figuring out how we experience it, how we can sort of direct it, allocate it, so to sort of optimize and get the most out of the time that we do spend. And I mean, I love this area of work because time is absolutely the sort of fabric, as I said, of our life. How you spend your minutes adds up to your hours, adds up to your days and years and your life overall. And so as a business school professor, there's so much focus in, my contacts and even in our culture on money as that critical resource, which sure, how you spend your money can sort of signal something about you, but how you spend your time is literally how you're spending your life and therefore who you are. And so it's an absolutely, like, if there's sort of any takeaway, it's just how important time is. And once you start thinking about time and drawing your attention to it, that in itself has a really positive effect because it makes people more deliberate and intentional in how they're spending it. And my work shows that drawing people's attention to time, even for instance, doing that time tracking assignment, simply drawing attention to how you're spending your time makes people spend it better because they're more thoughtful and they start spending in ways that are aligned with one's own personal values. And is more satisfying as opposed to wasted, which so much of our time does get wasted. We were already talking about the role of technology and in particular social media. In the time tracking results of my students, for instance, they're spending a lot of hours in their week, even though they think it's sort of, a minute here, a few minutes here, a few minutes there. Those minutes add up. And if you look at their ratings of how they feel during that time, it is not positive. It's not like it's a source of pleasure and joy, nor is it productive, right? It's not contributing to their sort of broader goals in life or even the tasks that they need to complete in their days. But it is subsuming a lot of time in a very mindless way. And again, to the extent that one becomes more intentional or sort of thoughtful about time, and therefore intentional in how they spend it, then people automatically sort of reallocate towards better ways of spending.
Yeah, I just realized there's a lot of things that I know you don't have enough, no one has enough time. It's a joke, but no joke. But, escape rooms, people that are unfortunately in jail that have a lot of idle time, athletics where people are under tremendous time constraints for time trials. There's all these jobs and positions where time plays probably a huge role, like for police, decision making in the spur of the moment, whether someone's going to hurt them or not, someone's adversarial or not. So, I mean, you could do a time study per industry, how people perceive it. There's just tons of things that could be done.
Yeah. And there's a lot that is being done. And there's, so even, as you talked about the role, another dimension of time in the workplace is degree of flexibility. Sort of coming out of COVID, flexibility in one's time is one of the primary dimensions that employees look for in terms of where they want to work, as well as so it affects recruitment efforts by organizations as well as retention. We see this great resignation for reasons that I would argue are all sort of grounded in time. It's lack of flexibility. We have come to see, so, when I talked about the time tracking research, so while social connection is among the happiest, is the happiest activities, the least happy activities across Americans are commuting and then work hours and housework. And when, in the pandemic, where so many people, their commute time was no longer a part of their workday, and this was, historically in way of an activity that was so negative that then when it's like they're asked to go back into the office, which involves, for the average American, it's they have a half-hour commute each way. And that's the average. There's certainly those who have way more than that. So that means an hour of their day is spent commuting in a way that is an activity that feels like a waste. In Happier Hour, I sort of talk about ways that you can make some of those wasteful ways of spending feel more fulfilling and actually make them more worthwhile by bundling them with other activities. So here you are doing this wonderful Finding Genius podcast. So in allowing listeners to learn during this time, they can do this while commuting to make their commute time more fulfilling. They can do it, listen while folding their laundry to make that chore more enjoyable and fulfilling. And so there are ways to make wasted time feel more worthwhile.
Yeah, no, definitely. Just going back to one subject that you were talking about before is age. So from what I understand, as people get older, their perception of time speeds up. But yet, like you mentioned, they're more happy to do slower things. So I'm like getting into, unfortunately, my late 40s. But I feel that too. Like I feel like time's going much faster. But then again, I'm more patient and I'm more slow with certain things. Like, my wife says I drive like a grandmother now, but I'm in no rush anymore. And when I was younger, I wanted to rush around, and even though you get lots of time, you just feel like, oh, I want to do this, do that, be moving and going. And so it's interesting, all these interplays, all these I don't know, I guess seesaws of perceived time versus how fast you move, et cetera. It's just interesting to me.
Yeah, well, it is interesting. And I actually have work on looking at the role of age in how we experience time. So sort of absolutely supporting what you just shared about your experience. What we found is not only, I already shared research on the types of experiences that elicit greater happiness changes with age, but so does even the way we experience happiness. So we found, actually analyzing millions of blog posts or expressions of emotion, like when someone writes, I feel or I'm feeling happy in historically the sort of blogosphere, we found that there were sort of two expressions or clusters of types of happiness. There was that sort of excited happiness that, as you were describing it, sort of faster, louder happiness versus calm contentment. And what we found was younger people are more likely to express and feel happiness more in terms of excitement. As you get older, folks start to experience happiness more as calm contentment, and sort of picking up on that dimension that you mentioned in terms of speed, that calm contentment is less is less speedy. So yes, age also plays a very much a role. As you mentioned, like as you're noting, there's so many wonderful sort of questions around time that are being answered, and so many more to be answered.
Hey, this last thing, I interviewed Johan Hari. He did a book called Stolen Focus. I don't know if you've read it or not, but he talks about time, and he put himself on a like node technology experience I don't know, up near Boston somewhere in Nantucket for a whole summer. So it was just an interesting read on his perception of time and how things affected him and his level of distraction. And may play into your research. I don't know.
Yeah, and it absolutely does. And I would say that for listeners, you don't need, though, to move off the grid for an entire summer. That you can actually, I have my students do that 6-hour digital detox. And that's a big chunk of time that's just to sort of fully get them through that withdrawal experience, to start experiencing the benefits of not being distracted and being fully engaged, by being off of sort of digital, like the social media in particular, and sort of passive screen time. But once it doesn't have to be even those big chunks of hours. It's simply, having what I call no phone zones, as we already mentioned, during dinner. Like, even if you have a half hour or a coffee date, I have coffee dates with my daughter. It's a half hour, put my phone away, and you get the benefits. So I'll just say it's actually quite accessible. And, it's just, again, being intentional and deliberate of figuring out, when are you going to put your phone away? What activities are you going to make no phone zones, so that you make those times more quality and richer, and getting the most out of those hours that you are spending.
Yeah. Have you thought about creating a course or integrating it with your curriculum? Well, you've done the 6-hour detox, but for the public at large, all the things you're learning sound incredibly important to me, and it sounds like it would help society a lot. So have you thought about, are you able to do a course and offer it, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's absolutely what my book is, Happier Hour, that it is based off of seeing the impact of the course. And obviously there's limited spaces in my classroom, but I wanted these learnings to be sort of more available to the broader public. And so I wrote it in a way that is digestible and accessible so that folks can absolutely apply these insights to make their time better.
Well, excellent, Cassie. So unfortunately, not everyone can take your course, but so the best thing is get your book, or let's recap for the listeners. How can they start learning about all the things that and get help? So please restate the name of your book, where it's available, and where they can find out more about you.
Yes. So all of it is in Happier Hour, my new book. Happier Hour, How to Beat Distraction, Expand Your Time, and Focus on What Matters Most. And you can buy it anywhere that you would buy a book, on Amazon, at your local bookstore. And my website, www.cassiemholmes.com. There you can find information about my research and the book, and where I will be giving talks, and this wonderful podcast that we've just done, for instance. And so, yeah, Happier Hour.
Excellent. Cassie, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much. It was a joy.
Remember, before you go, to grab your 1 penny bag of pine pollen for all the amazing, all-natural hormonal support that men and women the world over are raving about. Try it out and see how it works for you. All you have to do is head to geniuspollen.com to grab your bag today. Within days, you may be able to notice greater energy, more focus, added recovery, and more. Again, please visit geniuspollen.com to learn more now. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.